Stop. Listen. Pay attention. Chosen one. This moment is not casual, and you are not here by drift. Something precise is being addressed, and it concerns you directly. You have been carrying a quiet fatigue that sleep does not fully touch. Not exhaustion from doing too much, but weariness from holding yourself together, while the environment kept looping the same pressures. You felt it in your body first. A tightness that came and went. A heaviness that had no obvious cause. You stayed functional, but it cost you more than you admitted. There has also been a subtle isolation. Not the dramatic kind. The kind where conversations still happen, responsibilities still move, but something inside you stands slightly apart, watching, conserving energy, refusing to fully collapse or fully explain itself. You may have wondered why you felt present and distant at the same time. Why clarity flickered instead of staying constant. This message does not come to alarm you. It comes to orient you. What you experienced recently was not confusion, and it was not failure to move forward. It was pressure without permission. It was repetition without progress. It was a pattern that tried to close around you, not loudly, but persistently. And you noticed something important. You did not break the way you expected to. You did not react the way the situation seemed designed to provoke. That difference matters. You may have questioned your own steadiness. You may have thought, why does this feel intense if nothing dramatic is happening? Or why do I feel watched by circumstances as if timing itself is nudging me? Those questions are signals, not doubts. They arise when something is being tested without announcing itself. This message is intentional. It is not generic encouragement. It is a response to a specific moment where you remained upright inside an invisible strain. You did not panic. You did not flee. You did not overcorrect. You stayed. That alone tells a story you have not yet fully heard. You are about to understand why the loop lost traction. Not through mystery, but through clarity. Not by inflating meaning, but by naming what actually happened. Stay with this. Nothing here is accidental. This message is not for everyone who happens to hear it. It is for you because something involved you directly, even if no one else noticed it happening. You did not imagine the shift. You did not misread your own response. What occurred required your specific internal makeup. That is how you know this applies to you. Not because you are searching for meaning, but because your system reacted before your mind tried to explain it. Chosen one. This is where ambiguity ends. You are not someone who needs constant activation to remain stable. You do not require external reassurance to hold your ground. When pressure increases, something in you tightens into coherence instead of fragmenting. That is not learned behavior. That is baseline structure. Many people struggle consciously. They argue with their thoughts, wrestle their emotions, negotiate with fear. You noticed something different about yourself. Even when uncertainty was present, you did not unravel internally. You may not have felt calm, but you remained aligned. You stayed capable. You stayed present. That distinction matters. What you went through did not ask for effort from you. It tested resistance that already existed. You did not have to tell yourself to be strong. You did not have to perform courage. You did not need a dramatic decision to hold steady. You simply did not collapse when the environment subtly leaned in. That is the marker. This message is for you because what happened was not about overcoming something. It was about revealing something that was already there. The loop that tried to repeat did not account for internal stability without noise. It expected reaction. It expected escalation. It expected either withdrawal or confrontation. gave it neither. That is not passivity. That is regulation. There is a difference between someone who survives by constant effort and someone whose system absorbs pressure without distortion. You are in the second category. That does not make you untouchable. It makes you reliable under strain. You may not have named yourself this way before. You may not have wanted a label. But identity is not a title you claim. It is a pattern others cannot impose upon you. Chosen one is not a compliment here. It is a designation based on function. What involved you recently did so because your presence alone altered the outcome. You did not intervene. You did not resist outwardly. You simply remained yourself, and the sequence could not complete. That is why this message found you, not to elevate you, but to remove doubt. You are not guessing what happened. You were part of it. There is one dominant symptom you recognized, even if you never named it out loud. A persistent sense of tension without a clear target. Not anxiety in the usual sense, not fear that demanded action. More like a background pressure that stayed present even when things appeared stable. You may have interpreted it as restlessness or impatience or a flaw in your focus. You may have wondered why your body felt alert when nothing urgent was happening. Why relaxation felt incomplete, as if something unresolved was still hovering at the edges of your awareness. That sensation was not a problem. It was a signal. When systems designed to repeat begin to lose hold, the first thing they produce is friction, not chaos. Friction, a subtle resistance that shows up as discomfort rather than danger. Your body registered it before your mind could assign meaning. That is why you felt it without being able to explain it. You did not fail to relax. You were registering transition. Many people misjudge this stage. They assume something is wrong with them. They add self-criticism. They try to fix what is not broken. You may have briefly questioned yourself too. That is understandable. But notice what you did not do. You did not spiral. You did not abandon your routines. You did not numb yourself into distraction. You stayed attentive. That tension was information moving through you. It was the sensation of pressure points disengaging, of something repetitive losing alignment. Your system stayed active not because it was threatened, but because it was recalibrating in real time. This is why judgment did not help. There was nothing to correct. The discomfort was not a sign of weakness or instability. It was the cost of staying integrated, while something external attempted to maintain influence. You may have noticed your thoughts becoming more selective, less reactive. You spoke less not because you had nothing to say, but because unnecessary output felt wasteful. You conserved energy instinctively. That is not withdrawal. That is precision. Your emotions may have flattened temporarily, not numb, but neutral. That too is regulation. When a system is under observation, it does not overexpress. It stabilizes first. What matters is this. The symptom passed without escalation. It did not become panic. It did not become collapse. It resolved quietly, leaving behind clarity instead of residue. That tells you everything. You were not malfunctioning. You were adapting faster than the situation could adjust. The discomfort was the sound of alignment shifting, not of something breaking. And once you understand that, you stop asking, "What is wrong with me?" You start asking, "What changed that required me to stay steady?" That question prepares you for what comes next. What you encountered was not internal confusion. It was external pressure meeting an internal structure that did not yield. There was a period recently where circumstances aligned in a way that felt coordinated. Not dramatic, not obvious, but dense. Small demands stacking, timing tightening, expectations appearing without invitation. None of it extreme on its own, yet together, it formed a kind of compression. You felt it as weight, not threat. This pressure did not announce itself because it did not need to. It relied on familiarity, repetition, the assumption that you would respond the way you always had before, that you would explain yourself, adjust yourself, overextend slightly to keep things moving. But something was different this time. The pressure arrived and you noticed it, yet your internal center stayed intact. You continued functioning. You handled responsibilities. You made decisions. You showed up where needed. And still, you did not fracture inside. That is the detail that matters most. Many people equate pressure with breakdown. You did not. You remained composed without becoming rigid. You stayed flexible without losing form. That balance is rare, and it was not accidental. What confronted you was not chaos. It was structure attempting to assert continuation, a loop built on expectation and response. It depended on predictability, on you filling the same role in the same way at the same time. You did not refuse it openly. You did not confront it directly. You simply did not reinforce it. That is why the pressure did not escalate. It could not find leverage. It could not provoke a reaction strong enough to reassert control. You stayed present, but you did not over-engage. You stayed responsive, but you did not chase resolution. From the outside, nothing looked unusual. From the inside, you were holding steady under a test that never fully revealed itself. This kind of confrontation rarely announces itself as opposition. It presents as inconvenience, delay, ambiguity, or emotional drain. It counts on fatigue to create compliance. It waits for you to slip back into automatic patterns. You did not. Your functionality under pressure was not adrenaline-driven. It was regulated. Your mind stayed clear enough to prioritize. Your body stayed responsive without tipping into alarm. Your emotions stayed available without overflowing. That combination is not learned in crisis. It exists beforehand. What you passed through was not a battle. It was an exposure of limits. And those limits were not yours. The pressure reached its threshold and found no opening. So it loosened. Quietly. Without spectacle. You may not have noticed the exact moment it released. Most people do not. They only notice the absence afterward. The return of breath. The sense of space. The subtle clarity that arrives without explanation. That is how you know something ended. Not because it exploded, but because it could not continue. What you experienced can be understood clearly when you break it down into its pressure points. Not as drama, not as threat, as mechanisms that attempted to extract reaction energy or compliance. You stayed stable through each one often without realizing you were doing anything at all. The first pressure point was doubt. Not loud doubt. Quiet erosion. Small questions that tried to blur your internal signal. Thoughts like, maybe I am misreading this, or perhaps I should adjust myself to make this smoother. These thoughts did not arrive as panic. They arrived as suggestions. The test was whether you would internalize them. You did not. You allowed them to pass without turning them into self-accusation. That restraint kept your center intact. The second pressure point was emotional drag. Situations that required empathy, explanation, or patience appeared closer together than usual. Not enough to overwhelm you individually, but enough to tax your reserves collectively. This kind of drain works slowly. It assumes you will overgive to restore harmony. You did not. You stayed engaged, but you did not overextend. You recognized the difference between presence and depletion, and you chose regulation over performance. The third pressure point was time compression. Moments where things felt slightly rushed, delayed, or misaligned. You may have felt as if your natural rhythm was being nudged off center. This is where many people panic or force decisions prematurely. You did neither. You allowed timing to remain imperfect without trying to dominate it. You trusted your pacing, even when external cues suggested urgency. That prevented distortion. The fourth pressure point was isolation. Not abandonment, but a subtle sense that you were carrying understanding others did not share. Conversations stayed surface level when you felt something deeper was occurring. This can create self-doubt or frustration. You resisted both. You did not demand validation. You did not retreat into silence out of resentment. You accepted temporary solitude as neutral, not as rejection. The fifth pressure point was energy fluctuation. Your energy did not disappear, but it became selective. You may have noticed yourself pulling back from unnecessary stimulation. Less tolerance for noise, less interest in forced interaction. This is often mistaken for burnout. It was not. It was prioritization. Your system conserved strength for what mattered and released what did not. That is not collapse. That is efficiency. Through all of this, the key detail is not what you felt. It is what you did not do. You did not catastrophize. You did not dramatize your internal state. You did not project blame outward or inward. You did not rush to fix what was not broken. You stayed functional. You met your obligations. You maintained coherence. That tells us the pressure was not greater than your capacity. It only revealed where your capacity already exceeded the demand. Each pressure point relied on the same assumption: that you would react automatically, that you would fill the gap, that you would smooth the edges, that you would carry the weight quietly and then wonder why you felt tired. This time you carried only what belonged to you. That is why the loop failed. Loops require unconscious participation. They repeat because someone keeps responding the same way under the same conditions. You altered nothing deliberately, yet everything shifted because your internal response was no longer predictable. You did not withdraw. You did not confront. You remained present without reinforcing the pattern. That is the most destabilizing thing you can do to a repeating structure. Notice how this required no force, no declaration, no resistance. It required only internal consistency, the kind that comes from knowing when to engage and when to remain still. You did not win anything here. You simply refused to lose yourself to momentum. That distinction matters, because it means this was not a peak moment. It was a baseline reveal. A demonstration of how you operate under pressure when you are no longer available for automatic extraction. Once a system encounters that level of regulation, it cannot continue as before. It either adapts or disengages. In your case, it disengaged. Quietly, without explanation, without closure that needed to be chased. And that is why what comes next is not about preparing for another test. It is about understanding what this one already confirmed. Now comes the part where understanding settles in, not as excitement, but as recognition. When you look back at what occurred, the most accurate word is not struggle. It is evaluation. Something assessed your stability and in the process revealed it to you. Not through external confirmation, but through the absence of collapse. At first, you may have searched for explanations that minimize the experience. You may have thought it was coincidence or timing, or simply a phase passing on its own. That is a common reflex. The mind prefers neutral explanations when something significant happens quietly. But neutrality does not explain coherence under sustained pressure. What happened cannot be reduced to luck. Luck does not account for consistency. Coincidence does not maintain alignment over time. Chance does not preserve internal order while external variables fluctuate. You did. As you reflect, you may notice how little you actually did differently on the surface. Your routines remained mostly intact. Your responsibilities did not disappear. Your environment did not radically change. And yet your internal response was markedly different from how it has been in past cycles. That contrast is the confirmation. Previously similar conditions might have pulled more from you, more explanation, more emotional labor, more self-adjustment. This time you stayed internally intact while still participating in life. That is not accidental growth. That is integrated resilience. There is also clarity in what did not linger afterward. No residue of resentment, no lingering anxiety, no sense of unfinished business. When pressure truly overwhelms someone, it leaves a trace. Fatigue that does not lift, irritation without a source, rumination that loops. You did not carry those forward. Instead, there was a subtle return of space, a quiet sense of it's over, even without a clear marker. That kind of resolution does not come from escape. It comes from completion. This is where many people misinterpret strength. They assume it must look dramatic to be real. But the most reliable forms of resilience look unremarkable from the outside. They show up as continuity, as steadiness, as the ability to remain yourself while conditions attempt to distort you. What you demonstrated was coherence. Coherence is not force. It is alignment between thought, emotion, and action under stress. When those elements remain synchronized, external pressure has nowhere to lodge itself. It cannot split you. It cannot create internal conflict. That is why the loop could not restart. Loops depend on fragmentation, on small internal disagreements that compound over time. You gave it none. Not because you fought it, but because you no longer supplied the conditions it required. This is the confirmation you needed, even if you were not consciously asking for it. You are not stabilized by circumstance. You are stabilized by structure. And structure, once revealed, does not disappear when things calm down. It remains. It becomes your reference point moving forward. This is not a conclusion meant to elevate you. It is meant to ground you, to remove lingering questions about whether you handled things correctly or missed something. You did not miss anything. You completed something. And that completion did not require explanation because it occurred at a level deeper than narrative. You are now aware, not in theory, but in experience, that your internal coherence holds under sustained, quiet pressure. That is not an idea. It is a fact you lived through. Hold that understanding gently. It will matter as you move forward. When you compare your response to what is common, the difference becomes clear without needing exaggeration. Most people react early. They feel pressure and immediately look for relief. They explain themselves. They seek validation. They attempt to control outcomes or withdraw entirely. Even moderate strain can disrupt their focus, their sleep, their tone with others. This is not weakness. It is simply how unregulated systems respond when demands stack quietly. You did not do that. Under less pressure than you experienced, many people lose presence. They become reactive. Their attention scatters. Their emotional range narrows. Small inconveniences feel personal. Time feels hostile. They begin to narrate their experience as failure or threat. You stayed present. You did not become sharper or harsher. You did not disappear. You did not abandon your responsibilities or over-identify with them. You remained functional in a way that did not require constant effort. That is uncommon. This is not about being better than anyone else. It is about being structured differently. Rarity does not mean superiority. It means fewer people operate this way naturally. It means your nervous system, your attention, your sense of self are organized in a way that tolerates ambiguity without collapsing into urgency. That is not something you switch on. It is something you carry. Many people require reassurance to stabilize. You require clarity. Many people require resolution to relax. You can remain steady inside uncertainty. Many people mistake pressure for danger. You differentiate between demand and threat. That difference explains why the situation affected you less than it would have affected most. Not because you were unaffected, but because you stayed coherent while being affected. You may have noticed others around you becoming more reactive during the same period. More impatient, more drained, more scattered. That contrast was not accidental. The same conditions produce different outcomes depending on internal organization. You did not need to compare yourself to notice this. You felt it. The sense that something others would struggle with did not destabilize you in the same way. This is where misunderstanding often arises. People assume stability means emotional distance. It does not. You still felt. You still registered strain. The difference is that your feelings did not hijack your direction. That is rare. Not because emotions are weak, but because integration is uncommon. Most people have gaps between what they feel, what they think, and what they do. Under pressure, those gaps widen. In you, they stayed aligned. This is why the loop could not complete. It depended on predictable human reactions. Stress, overcompensation, withdrawal. You offered none of those in excess. You remained human. You simply did not unravel. Let this land. Without turning it into a story about identity, you need to perform. This is not a pedestal. It is a data point. Your stability under quiet, sustained pressure is not typical. And that fact matters not for ego, but for orientation. It tells you something about how you are built. And it explains why certain patterns stop when they reach you. This understanding prepares you for a clearer relationship with yourself going forward. What needs to be clarified now is subtle but essential. The steadiness you showed was not something that turned on in the moment. It was not a hidden power that suddenly activated.